Thank you to all of our panelists. And I want to say we're just going to have a few minutes for Q&A. I was slipped a note that we're going to need to end soon, but powerful stories, yes? Powerful stories. So thank you all. I want to open by asking you to return to your VISTA service. And you all have spoken so eloquently about it. Talk to us a little bit about one of your most proudest moments of your service. If you think about the work that you did, what you contributed, when you think about your pride in terms of your service, what memory, what event, what experience, person, what comes up for you when you think about that? And anyone can start.
I'll go. I think for me it's personal pride. For a while I hated myself because of the trauma that I went through. But through AmeriCorps and through the LGBT Center, I've been able to find myself, grow back into my roots, and embrace myself and love my community. And one of the biggest events we had was we honored Sergeant Leonard Matlevich, who was one of the first gay veterans to come out publicly. He was featured on Time magazine, and we had a wreath-laying ceremony on Veterans Day in his honor. We were able to get Brigadier General Tammy Smith, the first openly gay Brigadier General, and Kristen Beck, who's a former Navy SEAL, who went from Christopher Beck and transitioned to Kristen Beck. And that was probably one of my proudest moments. We had the Metro Blade, and it was just one of the first few times that I actually felt proud to be an LGBT veteran.
You know, I think for me, my proudest moment probably didn't happen during my VISTA service, but maybe almost 10 years later, when I got invited to come back to Grand Forks, North Dakota to speak at a hunger conference organized by the coalition that we had helped get started 10 years earlier called the Greater Grand Forks Hunger Advisory Council. And all these unusual suspects that we had brought together and kind of worked with collaboratively, we're still working together 10 years and bringing others into the conversation. And it felt so special that somehow I was a small part of that 10 years later, and to see it, in its form long after I had moved on was so rewarding.
Yeah, but no specific occasion comes to mind. It's more a feeling and an impression in two respects. One is to be, this is with the migrant program, one is to be part of a program whose, frankly, somewhat hidden agenda was to create local leadership, because its ostensible work was to offer adult education and all of that. But it was wonderful to see, and occasionally I would assist in putting this together, but to see the meetings happen and the leadership occur in farm worker groups and former farm worker groups in these communities saying, I can do this, I can debate, I can say what I want. And it took courage for people to say what they wanted in a community where they felt outsiders. And I am not claiming credit for that. What the proud moment was to be present and to be part of a team that was working toward that. And then the other proud thing is very much parallel to what you're saying in terms of I feel like I found myself. I was aimless, and I felt like I found a calling. I found, hey, I can do this. Not every piece of this, but I can be a person who can make a contribution if I try, if I pay attention. And that was affirming, and that is something I carried outward.
Thank you. So I don't know if I mentioned when I introduced myself, I have the privilege of being part of the team that helps to train new VISTAs as part of their pre-service orientation. And one of the segments that we talk about is entering community and what it means to bring yourself into a community and to really honor what already exists. So Shannon, you talked about you were in Orlando, Florida, when you get the letter that you're going to North Dakota, which I'm going to guess is a different community than the one that you've been in. So talk to us a little bit about that transition. What did it mean for you to enter that community? What are some of the things that you needed to navigate in that entry?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I almost treated my VISTA experience like a Peace Corps experience because North Dakota seemed so foreign to what I had experienced before. But I just went in and it was like, we have to get to know who's operating in this community and just understand, especially after a flood, who's doing what and what's the status of all these organizations that existed before. And so I think it was a really good opportunity, a great learning opportunity for me to understand how communities work and how the government and local nonprofits and places of worship actually come together to provide social services and take care of people. And so just, I don't know where, probably the PSO somehow influenced this, but our first set of priorities was let's set up all these interviews. And we just spent probably the first 2 weeks maybe talking to 3 or 4 or 5 different people who we saw somehow connected to this problem of hunger. And I'd say that first 2 weeks, maybe talk to 20 or 30 people who kept telling us who else we should talk to. So it was like social networking before we had that concept, and Facebook to help us.
Thank you. And Ed, you'd mentioned the political climate when you first started with your service, right? And to the extent that your appearance was even sort of somewhat managed in that. And I'm curious as to how you navigated the work that you were doing, understanding the political climate, because no one's serving in a vacuum, right? So there are things happening in this country that call us to service, but then also that we have to sort of negotiate. So how did you deal with that, and what were some of the things that came up there?
Well, there was both the macro political climate in terms of the anti-war movement was coming to a head, and the very divisive political times, and there had been civil disturbances right after the assassinations in 1968. So it was tumultuous in that way. And it was tumultuous internally for me, and then there was the draft, which a lot of us were facing. So that was the larger context. And so I think it added to the sense of confusion and apprehension that a lot of people my generation had. But then in the community where I was, that was to some extent isolated from the broader issues in a direct way, but we're seeing a different set of pretty powerful change forces happening in their small communities. These have been small farming communities with now a large Latino population coming in, bilingual schools, some places trilingual schools, with Russian, Spanish, and English, and to some extent, and Portuguese speakers among the old believers. So it was quite a change there, and I really took to heart the don't make waves in terms of your appearance or your demeanor. And I was in a somewhat different situation in that my job assignment was not actually to work directly with the local community, and in retrospect, I wish that we had done more of that. It was more like working within this organization so that they would be the face of the organization and the advocacy that needed to be done in the community. So partly by job description, I felt as I was more behind the scenes. On the credit union, for example, I dealt with the National Credit Union Administration and things like that, but otherwise it was internal and often being a sounding board for people who, these were non-professionals running these local offices, former farm workers, who I could help give advice to, or this is how you might approach it. So there was that sort of preparation and discussion, and maybe giving some insights about what might be going on in the local community. Not that I was not trained in that sort of thing. It was just using a 23-year-old's common sense, I guess. But
which is good common sense for those of you who might be 23. Just want to honor and acknowledge that. So Eric, I want to turn to you and get a sense. What's interesting there are obviously many things that are interesting in your story, but you also have a connection to the community that you serve. And I'm curious as to what, again, in the PSO, one of the things that we talk about is community engagement. So how has the community responded to you as being a VISTA, but a VISTA who maybe they can relate to, but then there are also differences? How do you see your relationships and connections with the people you serve shifting or changing over your time there? What's that been like?
It's been great. It's been hard, but it's been great. I'm part of the movement. I'm part of the fight. I'm struggling right there with them. It's been an incredible experience that has uplifted me in a very positive way. Because at one point in time, a lot of the people in our community didn't feel the pride that they should have felt. And there's no reason why the military shouldn't feel the pride for their LGBT service members, and why the military why our LGBT service members shouldn't feel proud for serving our military. So we're still part of that fight. A lot of our LGBT community volunteers at the DC Center actually have come out of the shadows and have told me that they have served in the military. And this is the work that we're doing with the Veterans History Project by highlighting a monthly LGBT veteran, because I know the VA does just a Veteran of the Month, but as well as LGBT service members have gone through a lot of struggles, and that should be recognized.
Great. So this segment is VISTA Then and Now, and as we begin to close, because we need to move on in our day, I want to ask you, by way of closing, one small piece of advice for our current and future VISTAs from your experience. And by small, I mean short. Because we're running a little short on time. But if as you look at, and obviously many people have served, and we have a bunch of folks who are serving now, what should folks know as VISTA steps into the next 50 years?
If I had my 5th lesson to put on the board, it would be, don't be afraid to ask for anything, because the worst that anyone can say to you is no.
I guess what I would say is hopefulness is part of your job description. That it's got to be a year off from cynicism, and whatever you're feeling, you can't project it.
Don't feel discouraged. If you're really passionate and you really care about the work that you're doing, don't treat it as a resume builder. Just keep doing the work. The community will follow you, and they'll always be there for you. This world is full of infinite possibilities, and nothing's impossible.
So please, yes, join me in thanking all of our panelists. Shannon Maynard, Representative Moore had to leave, Ed Needler, Eric Perez,